Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. My talk today has two parts. First, I'll start with an overview of my dissertation project on exhaustion, which is greatly influenced by energy studies, and I hope has a lot to offer the field in return. Second, to demonstrate my larger approach, I'll share a bit of a case study of what I call the plot of depletion, an energy-centered reorientation to literary naturalism's plot of decline. And my selected text for this analysis will be the 1923 novel Weeds by Edith Summers Kelly. With that said, I will begin. The origin of my research interest in exhaustion began as I was completing my PhD coursework remotely during the 2020 to 2021 academic year, when I read two formative books. For an environmental humanities themed class taught by none other than Jamie Jones herself, I read The Birth of Energy by Cara New Daggett. Enter, saw on my computer, enter energy. Then, for a GWS class, I read The Ends of Work by Kathy Weeks, enter work. And what do you get when you add the concepts of energy and work together? Exhaustion. Let me break this down a little bit more. On the one side of the equation, Daggett provided an introduction to the 19th century's emergent framework of energy as the ability to do work. I learned the importance of the historical context of energy transitions, industrialization, and new fields like thermodynamics. I lost my spot here already. A science of energy conservation and decay that influenced popular thought, culture, and literature, providing inspiration to examine further the languages and metaphors of energy as they were formed and used in the turn of the century. On the other side, Weeks introduced me to contemporary anti-work and post-work movements that take up work critically as a political problem to be studied and critiqued. Post-work identifies how deeply work structures our societies and our lives, imagining what a world beyond work as we know it now might look like, and considering how to bring that post-work future into being. If this sounds a little bit utopian, it did to me then too. I wondered, were any of the utopias I'd read recently actually been post-work societies all along that rejected work and imagined it radically otherwise? Reviewing utopias like Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy and Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, I noticed that they not only built utopias that centered on work in many familiar ways, but also spent much of the space of the novels themselves exhaustively and often boringly detailing how work functions in their societies. So when it came time to write a seminar paper, as it always does in grad school, I decided to look elsewhere for rejections of work. I looked to the group of people in the progressive era known for their non-productive use of time, as Thorstein Veblen put it. I'm talking about the leisure class, of course. So I picked up my old copy of Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, expecting to examine models of leisure galore, only to discover, you probably guessed it, more work. Not necessarily work in the stereotypical sense of a job that you clock in and out of, but the exertions of an overworked protagonist, Lily Bart, whose energy levels deplete due to the fact that she's always on the clock without proper breaks, trying to find a husband to secure material security for herself. It was in the seminar paper, now available in longer form in the Edith Wharton Review, that I realized energy and work are all over literature of the turn of the century, and that to study them would require thinking expansively in terms of archive and secondary research. I call my approach exhaustion, which I'm using as an umbrella term. To fully explain what exhaustion entails, I will explain it in parts, 6 parts exactly. So here are the 6 things you need to know about exhaustion. Pardon my BuzzFeed style of communication, but they're onto something. Lists work. Okay, Number 1, exhaustion is based in the historical context of energy transition in the tumultuous late 19th century, part of what Jamie Jones calls fossil modernity, or the period of US and planetary history characterized by intensive fossil fuel consumption. Fossil modernity also includes our ways of work, leisure, life, culture, and identity associated with massive fossil fuel consumption. In other words, literature is influenced by and contributes to fossil fuel culture, and my exhaustion approach reflects this purposely with close reading for energy paired with grounded, historicized environmental context. 2, exhaustion is quantifiable due to the logic of energy upon which it relies. After all, as Daggett explains, the study and use of fossil fuels led to the universalization of energy as the unit that underlies all activity. Unit is the notable word here. Units are measurable. An example of this from the turn of the century would be the standardization of horsepower, a measurement that could be applied to animal, human, and machine. A great other explanatory metaphor for this is Anson Robbenbach's The Human Motor as well. So by looking at all work in terms of energy, I find that I can yoke together wildly different forms of labor from the jungle to the House of Mirth. And this leads me relatedly to number 3, which is that exhaustion makes visible the exertions and effects of labor on bodies, and in so doing has great potential to attend to the inequities of labor. In my work, I especially identify and stress the value of invisible, unwaged, gendered, and/or racialized labor, in the sense that the personal is political, that age-old adage. An individual's experience of exhaustion can be the source of a novel's political critique. Though it's out of my time period and not a novel, a play, I've written about weariness in Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, and how she uses weariness to characterize both the family's worn-down apartment and the character of Ruth herself, who is worn down by her day job in domestic service, then taking care of her family at home. And this is all within the larger story about racial segregation in Chicago and how exhausting survival amidst the structures of white supremacy can be for the family. What is Ruth's dream in this play? It's to take a bath in the new house with like a nice bathroom. And so the power of having access to and being able to rest, to recharge your batteries, as we say, is the ultimate point of A Raisin in the Sun in my reading. Hansberry anticipates the rest is resistant movement led by Tricia Hershey, if any of you have seen that on Instagram and more. So inspired by 19th and 20th century writers using representations of exhaustion as a political critique, my 4th thing about exhaustion as I approach it is just that. I think exhaustion can be a method of reading and critique, providing new ways to think about our problems today related to climate change, fossil capitalism, white supremacy and racial injustice, patriarchy, and how we might respond to them. On to number 5. Exhaustion draws upon interdisciplinary scholarship to think about energy and labor expansively. In addition to energy studies, I also frequently draw upon medical humanities and disability studies when it comes to the physiological side of exhaustion, thinking about embodiment and the physically exerted body. In the spirit of demonstrating how exhaustion can productively join medical and environmental humanities, I have a slight tangent to share a funny example from 19th century physician and writer George Miller Beard, who my advisor Justine Mearson introduced me to, and his 1881 treatise on neurasthenia titled American Nervousness. Beard explains the nervous system at one point, and I'm paraphrasing here, in terms of machines supplying electricity to a certain number of lamps. And he goes on to warn that adding additional lamps to the circuit requires an increased power of the engine, or else the lamp's light will dim out or go out entirely. Beard then brings this back directly to nervousness, but still in the vocabulary of machines and their forces. Quote, "The nervous system of man is the center of the nerve force, supplying all of the organs of the body. Like the steam engine, its force is limited, although it cannot be mathematically measured," end quote. And then just a bit later, he brings it all home, bringing the nerves and the lamps together. Quote, "When the amount of force is insufficient to keep all the lamps actively burning, those that are the weakest go out entirely, or, as more frequently happens, burn faint and feebly. They do not expire, but give an insufficient and unstable light. This is the philosophy of modern nervousness," end quote. Isn't that great? The point of this tangent is to say, if the 19th century thinkers thought so expansively about the body, we can try to do the same. For me, that means borrowing tools from environmental and medical humanities alike under my umbrella term of exhaustion. I have a large toolbox I like to bring in from far. Back to my list. Lastly, number 6, exhaustion encompasses a multitude of the turn of the century genres and forms: realism, regionalism, naturalism, and even modernism. I find that the recurring themes, metaphors, and vocabulary of energy are the connective tissue between these genres. To varying degrees, writers in these genres take up energy and work over and over again. So to reflect this, for example, in my larger dissertation chapter on the plot of decline, I consider a novel from most of those genres. So in addition to The House of Mirth and Weeds, which I'll talk about today, I also analyzed Nella Larsen's Quicksand, Dreiser's Sister Carrie, and I go back to Wharton again with The Custom of the Country. Sister Carrie and The Custom of the Country, by the way, are in my outliers section, which I could say about more later. But I will pause to reflect for a moment on literary naturalism, as it's the natural bridge between my exhaustion overview and my case study of Weeds, which is a naturalist novel. In past scholarship on naturalism, scholars took up the 19th century's abstractions of energy. They too framed the universe as made up of external abstract social forces acting upon people. I, however, try to relentlessly ground my analysis of natural texts in environmental history, and I also try to reparticularize the forms of work and their costs in a way that the abstraction of energy alone cannot do. The move from the plot of decline to the plot of depletion is my way today of demonstrating how an energy study approach to naturalism can bring about updated and exciting readings of familiar naturalist texts. A quick terminology refresher on the plot of decline. Many of the novels of Work and Exhaustion have already been studied through the plot of decline. With its emphasis on the abstract architecture of plot, readings in this vein find in naturalist texts a tragic hero doomed to fall, potential growth to failure to develop, and the themes of deterioration, pessimism, and catastrophe. I seek a plot, however, that more accurately reflects the content of naturalist novels, which are so often full of concerns about employment, jobs, money, strikes, urban industrial settings, and the like. Think of McTeague, Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, and Sister Carrie, The Jungle, for example. I also seek a plot that helps de-emphasize the idea of external forces. External forces acting upon helpless individuals, which is a large part of the pessimistic determinism of naturalism, which can be a bit of a downer, frankly. I think about individuals' interior energy and their ability to act and make choices within the conditions and constraints of their life. It is the depletion of their energy and their barriers to energy repletion that limit the character's success more than a predestined fate. So I turn in this new direction, and I define my plot of depletion as a narrative of energy, specifically the typically declining levels of energy in a protagonist. The typical plot of depletion opens with an individual full of energy and capable of work and success. Their energy levels then waver and deplete as the narrative goes on, typically due to exploitative labor. The narrative ends with a completely exhausted character, often unable to rest and sleep effectively. Yes, okay. If the movement of the standard plot of decline might be best pictured as a line graph, I think pictures help explain the differences. With a line graph with a certain rise to a certain point where it then drops off in an irretrievable decline, then in contrast, the plot of depletion might be pictured as a battery, though depending on what's in your mind, the image of a battery that pops up, this metaphor may vary. So for instance, Alessandro Volta's battery, or voltaic pile, which is on the right there, is a stack of metal discs that could conduct electricity, and it resembles a stack of coins more than it does contemporary batteries that we might use for our television remotes. But better yet, you might be thinking of the more symbolic battery sign in the upper corner of most of our electronic devices, signaling how much power your device has remaining. I find this symbol useful for the plot of depletion. Imagine starting out with a full battery that then depletes. The battery can, again, fill up if charged. It can also die if not charged. The naturalist plot of depletion is like this. Ultimately, advocating for the plot of depletion is not a simple changing of the lexicon to discuss naturalism and work. The larger contribution I seek to provide is a revitalized way of reading naturalist texts that allow us to better attend to the dynamics and politics of work and the representational strategies used by writers. My shift in terms from decline to depletion is meant to signal this reorientation to text and emphasize the relevance of the context of energy. Now, finally, to the literature, with what time I have. In the spirit of making the invisible visible, my selection of Weeds, a lesser-known novel, is in part to accomplish a secondary goal, raising recognition for Edith Summers Kelly. I could say more about her, but suffice it to say here that though she has received recovery efforts through the publication of her through Weeds twice and through The Devil's Hand, which was posthumously published, she still does not have as much recognition as others. In her novel of poor tenant farmers in rural Kentucky, Weeds, Kelly offers a deep understanding of the struggle to live and make art amidst harsh economic and material conditions, especially for working women who also deal with the demands of reproductive labor and the totalizing, soul-deadening monotony of domestic labor. Weeds is a classic story of a young woman named Judy Pippinger who has great potential. She is known as the poppy amongst the weeds. She has artistic talents, wit, and intelligence, and then she marries, and her husband, Jerry, take up tenant farming, typical to their region, which is based on Kelly's own experiences in real life farming there with her husband. Judy is exhausted by farm labor, pregnancy, housekeeping, childbearing. I'll share more specifics as I go through some of my notable examples of how energy is used in the novel. I'll begin with Kelly's exploration of being full of energy in youth. Judy and Jerry's early months of marriage are exuberant, playful, even as they have work to do. Their approach toward work is informed by their relative naivete, coupled with their youthful exuberance. Quote, work had never as yet showed its ugly side to them, hence they had no dread of it. They were accustomed to work and expected to do so all of their lives as a matter of course. How else could they use up all of the abundant strength and energy that surged each day as from an inexhaustible wellspring into their young bodies, end quote. Kelly draws on the language of energy here to describe Judy and Jerry's ultimately misguided belief system about their bodies and their labors. They believe they have an active supply, a surplus even, of strength and energy available to them, and energy is a resource of which they feel a need to use, to put to work. So the specific simile Kelly evokes here is telling. Energy that surges from an inexhaustible wellspring. Figuratively defined, a wellspring is a source of origin providing a constant or abundant supply of something. In the more literal sense, a spring is an exit point where groundwater naturally flows to the Earth's surface, becoming surface water. Springs take various forms, driven by forces like gravity, such as a stream or a river, a hot spring or a geyser. A third level of the meaning for the wellspring metaphor is also that it may bring to mind an energy spring, or the oil seep, a natural leak of crude oil and gas, a literal source of energy functioning similarly to a wellspring. These metaphors help to make sense of Judy and Jerry's labors because they evoke the exhaustive use of natural resources like oil and water in the same way that Judy and Jerry rely on their internal energy supplies to work. Ironically, the novel demonstrates that at a larger level, Judy and Jerry themselves are human resources, exhausted by the heteronormative capitalist systems conditioning their lives. The idea of buoyancy is another central metaphor Kelly uses to depict the youthful belief in never-ending energy and ability. Early on, Judy is described as young and buoyant is a frequent word throughout the novel. Later, when Judy is weighed down by life, Kelly recalls this term to emphasize its absence. The buoyancy and effervescence of youth were gone. In a figurative sense, buoyancy refers to the elasticity of spirit, lightheartedness, capacity for recovering after depression. In Judy's case, buoyancy is evoked to represent her activeness as well as her ability to recover from physical exhaustion and by replenishing her energy from her supposedly inexhaustible wellspring. The more literal scientific sense of buoyancy is interesting here as well. Put simply, buoyancy is the idea that the downward force of gravity is balanced by the upward force of buoyancy, resulting in a buoyant floating object. An upset balance would result in the object sinking. Put metaphorically, the conditions of Judy's life are the downward force, such as the exertion of labor. Her relative youth and energy and optimism are her upward force. So balanced at this point in the novel, Judy remains peacefully afloat in her life. The scales of this energy balance tip irretrievably, though, when reproductive labor takes over Judy's life. At this point, Kelly relies on the concept of lethargy, a pathology used to describe the experiences of energy depletion. Kelly's depiction of lethargy in particular draws upon the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, which luckily Rachel already talked about, so I don't have to explain it too much.
You have a picture that would help.
Yes. So entropy describes disorder and ultimately wasted energy that is no longer capable of work. So the more dispersion, the less energy available for work. Entropic lethargy is used to depict the confinement of Judy's life as she is burdened with childcare and housework and no longer able to expend her energy on the outdoor tasks, which she actually prefers. With more time, I could say more about this. And I'm going to paraphrase my last point, but the final concept from energy that Kelly uses throughout the book is that of nutrition, or the idea of food as fuel. You might have heard that before. And the concept of the calorie became a popular method of understanding food in the early 20th century. So this is, again, that quantification that I was talking about. And the kilometer, I might be mispronouncing that, but that is how they were measuring food and calories and whatnot. So let me just forward to my conclusion now. In conclusion, what I hope to have demonstrated in my talk today is how the language of energy, the ways we talk about work, and concerns about our concerns about the environment has its roots in the emergence of energy and the effects of fossil fuel on life and culture in the 19th and 20th century as evinced in literature. Whether it is The Jungle or Weeds or The House of Mirth, turn-of-the-century fiction helps us better understand the ways we work, how we feel about work, and what we hope to change about work moving forward. Thank you.